will be in control of those until an incident management team gets in place. And so an incident management team has been in place since the 17th. So there was a couple of days where one was not in place. And so Brad's going to give a bit of the history of how these fires, which eventually became the Shetland Creek wildfire. I'll take over and give a bit of an update on the last few days of incident management team work. Likely I'll get Colton to put on the perimeter, our dashboard, and I can kind of point through a few different things. And then after that, we'll get Greg to just give a bit of a higher level view of what the next couple of days look like for areas surrounding this fire. Obviously, it's all interconnected within a fire center in terms of overall response to individual fires, but we also need to balance response to everything that's also going on in the center and provincially as well, which we're quite busy with wildfire response at a provincial level as well. So give it over to Brad for a little bit, and then I'll take over and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Forrest. Yeah, I just wanted to open with thanks for having us here. And I know it's in a really tough time. And, you know, we're trying to do everything we can in BC Wildfire Service to protect what's valuable to you and your communities. What we thought we'd start with is a little bit of like, how did we get here? And so I've got just a few notes for myself, but just to sort of talk about how this fire started. So it was July 12th is when we first got our first reports, and it was detected late in the evening. We did send a helicopter and an officer out to have a look at it. There were multiple starts in that area, I think, as you may recall from the dry lightning that we did receive, and sort of up and along where what we know now is where the fire perimeter is. There was 1, 2, 3, 4 ignitions. The next day, we dispatched 2 officers, an initial attack crew to, this is the Shetland Creek fire. So 910 is what you'll see it on some of the maps. So we sent in some officers, some crews, and aerial resources, and an air tanker request went in that sort of first day. We also contracted a bunch of heavy helicopters, and when we refer to a heavy helicopter, that's heavy lift. So it's a type of helicopter that can lift the most amount of water. And over the course of the 2 days, we had 4 of them working in that area. And the next day, we added some more resources, which were DTA falling crew that went in to support the crews. So a second crew was added in there, and we did a follow-up air tanker request for Fire 910. And then on the 15th, we added more crews to that to that incident, and it was also continuing to be supported by the heavy helicopters and the air tankers. And it was the 15th is when we saw that the fire behavior increased to rank 5, which is an organized crown fire, and that caused our crews to have to back off because of that fire behavior. And then on July 16th, we tried to go after it again, and we added a unit crew to the mix. And if you recall, I mean, it was hot and it was dry. So relative humidity was down almost into the single digits in that area. Relative humidity plays a huge role in fire behavior. It was 40 degrees on the hillside. So we were in some pretty difficult conditions. I actually flew that Saturday. I flew over those fires myself. And where the crews were staging on, this is Fire 910, they were hiking 800 meters straight up the hill and slashing trail trying to get at the fire. The second fire, which the 2 merged, that was Fire 913, K70913, and same detection, same sort of detection plan, like when we observed it and flew over it. The next day, it was noted right away. This was the one that was a little bit closer to Spence's Bridge, straight up the hill from, I believe that's Murray Creek or Service Road. That fire was ignited again by lightning, the dry lightning, but it was in extremely difficult terrain. So that was, on first assessment, we knew that we would need one of our specialized crews. That's the rappel crew, which flies in and rappels down down a rope or hoists down. The crew did arrive at that fire, and once they got a close assessment, it was determined that the ground was far too steep for them to operate safely on. So they weren't able to deploy. So what we did is we put in an air tanker request to see if we could box the fire in and blanket it, hoping that it might cool it down. We threw some helicopters at it, but unfortunately, as mentioned on the day where we saw the extreme fire behavior, July 16th, that fire as well let go and went beyond all of our aviation resources. And then eventually, I think it was the 16th or the 17th, those two fires merged. And so that was, we wanted to share our story there of how we kind of got here and what we tried to do. There wasn't, we threw the largest types of helicopters at it. We threw our air tankers at it, our specialized crews at it, our initial attack crews, our unit crews. And, you know, we tried our very best to see if we could pin these fires down. So with that, I think, and we determined early on that we saw a lot of potential in this fire, which is why we put in the request early and right away for an incident management team. And that's where Forrest will take over here. But this is a British Columbia Wildfire Service incident management team that is currently managing this incident for us.
Can you see if you can get the dashboard up there? I think that's the easiest way to go over this. And just zoom in on the perimeter on that fire. So as mentioned, incident management team, there's a number of them in the province. Essentially what they are is we're a bunch of rostered, pre-identified people that form a team throughout the whole summer, and we'll go and take over complex incidents such as this one when it sort of overwhelms what a fire center can handle, as again, fire centers have to deal with every other fire that's going on in their area. So this incident management team took control on the 18th. And so since then have been managing on behalf of and reporting to the Kamloops Fire Center. We've had increased resources kind of daily roll in terms of firefighting individuals and aircraft. It's been quite challenging the last several days in terms of fire behavior and weather patterns. So these fires are primarily wind driven in terms of when there is increase in fire behavior is very dependent on wind. We already have many weeks of hot and dry conditions built on years of drought. So trees are very dry. There's not a lot of moisture within the ground or within the actual trees themselves. So there's fire that's easily started when we have those dry conditions, and it's even more receptive to wind. So that's what we're seeing on some of those days when we've had the first sort of blow up event where we had fires merge and we had fire into the valley and kind of progressing in a northern pattern. And subsequently, we've had those wind driven events. Primarily winds are coming from here and kind of pushing up. So that's where we've seen that continue northern growth. Colton, can you try and go to the all layers tab and then, or sorry, the base map on the right and just put on the satellite level if it loads? I think it's the one above the, yeah, okay. So instead of going by minute over the last 4 or 5 days, I'm happy to answer any questions after if there's individuals that want, detailed answers, or I'm happy to go and try and get those answers if I don't know. I've been here for the last several days. Sarah's been here since the IMT was put into place on the 18th. There's things we don't know, happy to try and get those answers. If Greg, Brad, Sarah, and I can answer them, we'll go back and get them. Maybe that's very hard to see, but let's go back to the other one. Sorry, that's kind of dark there. So what we're working on right now, I think everyone is aware of where this fire has grown to. Again, happy to chat more in detail on what that is. The short and sweet of it is wind driven. We've had really strong winds. Yesterday was windy. It's going to probably get windy and is already windy today. And that's where we're seeing those high rank of fire that Brad was mentioning. So we have ranks 1 to 6. And so we're seeing almost at the highest end of that wildfire behavior. So that's fire getting into the tops of trees and continuously moving through the tops of those trees. And also the challenge is when we get those big windy days, creates a lot of fire, which creates a lot of embers, and those embers get lifted into the hot air and pushed forward. So we're seeing a lot of spotting as well, which is where these fires can rapidly grow, and they can grow ahead of themselves. But even with wind, primarily coming from the south, they can spot beside themselves as well. And then it's basically slope driven, where if it gets into the bottom of valleys, that starts on fire, and then fire is wanting to run up hills. And that's where we've seen some of that growth as well. So this is a really tricky area to fight fire in for a number of reasons. The way that the land makes fire grow exponentially in valleys. So wind gets funneled through them and then up the sides of valleys. The steepness of the terrain in some areas is really hard to put machine guard in. And then access for our firefighters as well. Just there are some roads that we can utilize, obviously through this area up into the Hat Creek, and there are roads, but when we're talking about some of these areas here, lots of timber and building guard is hard to do in places where we may want to put guard in. But any place we're trying to build guard along a slope, it's not easy to defend. We need to build them where we can defend those guards. And so sometimes what that does involve, which is what we're currently working on right now, and I'll try and get on the other side of this projector. So highway is here. It's not super easily seen, but it's kind of this line you can see here. So fire is moving slowly in some places and not so slowly in some places down to the highway. And so what we're trying to do along this eastern side is we have crews working here. We have crews working within the valley and then up in the Organ Jack and further up assessing into the Hat Creek. We've been really successful holding this northern line right now. Yesterday, we had some really challenging conditions that caused quite significant growth on the western and southwestern area. We did see movement east towards the highway, but not a lot north, which is good. What we're seeing here, and which is why the highway is closed and is challenging our containment here, is that it is moving down towards the highway, and we're really trying to not let it spot across the river, as well as not, as much as we can, not be in an uncontrolled manner. So we have crews here that are trying to bring fire as it's burning down towards the highway, trying to coach it down slowly and manage it where we can. In the end, we likely will need fire to be getting almost to the highway in most places. Otherwise, we have the risk of fire spotting from anywhere in this uncontrolled area into anywhere that still has fuel, and that will impact the highway. So that's kind of one of our big priorities. We obviously don't want to have the highway closed, and it also is one component into, which we'll speak a little bit about here, but the sneak peek is that re-entry is complicated and needs to be done to make sure that it's safe. And there's a number of hazards. We're in charge of some hazards in terms of wildfire, active wildfire, and a little bit on some of the mitigation work after wildfire. There's a lot of other considerations that have to be made in terms of safe access, transportation corridors, and safe egress if things do progress further is one of those. So we're really trying to contain it and bring it into safe places on this eastern side. We also have crews working within the valley and within on this north, as I mentioned. And so they're working as well to bring it to places where we can either extinguish the edge. And so once there's fire that has been to an area, it obviously can't reignite right now. In the future it might, but right now it can't. So if we can make things black, if we can get fire to places, we can be confident that that fire is not going to reignite. And when fire moves in and around an area. It's not going to reburn the same area twice currently. So lots of crew work on this eastern side. It's our primary focus right now, kind of from here along this side. And then we're working, obviously, Spence's Bridge is down here, and trying to keep containment along this bottom part here. It's not moving fast, but it is sort of creeping down the hillside there on this corner down to Spence's Bridge. So we have some work that we're working on here, but really this side of the fire is our primary area of work right now. Colton, if you want to drag it up to up here, where we are kind of future in terms of fire growth, this fire is going to want to burn here and come up and around. There's lots of continuous fuel in that area. It's tight and it's hard to work around this corner. So we're putting a lot of effort into containment and using a number of methods, combining those methods in terms of our suppression tactics. We're really trying to limit any future growth out of this area because it can be and will be quite challenging if it does, which again, we can do our best efforts. And if we get extreme winds, those are very challenging. So that's another area of our kind of key priority, and also plays into some of the safety on this side of us being comfortable with recommendations for order changes and alerts. Yesterday was quite active and variable fire growth happening in some places, quite active in others. Today is likely to be the same. And then on this fire, I'll let Greg speak to kind of broader, but on this fire, what we're looking at for the next couple of days, we are seeing a change in weather, which is right now why those winds are happening. So the really hot air mass that's been over this fire, but the majority of the province is being replaced with some cooler air. And so when that happens, winds increase as that kind of air mass changes. So we do have some cooler conditions than the plus 41 or so that is in this area that we've seen for the last number of days and longer. So it's supposed to get a bit cooler, which will have some help, but because of how dry conditions are right now, it honestly doesn't do a lot. Even if we get some scattered precipitation, I know when I'm checking my app, it says it might rain on some day from now, maybe Thursday or something. Raining one day is not going to do anything, unfortunately, even if it poured the entire day. To change the amount of moisture in the ground would be consistent rain for a long time, and a consistent amount of like 20 mils, like a lot of rain would be needed for recovery for long-term, bringing fuels back to a place where they're not so receptive. So all that to say, it is still, even if the temperature goes down and you may see that it might rain for one day, we're still being very challenged by fire on this one, and wind being one of the primary concerns because how much fire is out there now, and because it is so dry, wind can have a really drastic effect. So then Colton, maybe just zoom out to the whole perimeter here. So that's kind of the work that's happening right now. As I mentioned, focusing on that side, focusing tight containment in here as much as we can, limiting activity in this area. Obviously, anywhere that there's populated areas, structures, we have structure protection branch fully engaged in terms of structure, both protection and defense. So proactive work that has been done and continues to be done, but also active structure defense in some areas when we get that increase in wind. And so that's when the SPUs are actively defending against fire around structures instead of that proactive setup. So we do have that structure protection branch fully engaged on any and all properties in here. Again, obviously have been severely challenged on this fire in that efforts, and as well up into that populated area, and then up the Hat Creek area as well. We're looking at currently assessing and looking at what that looks like in terms of structure protection needs. We're also engaged with Cooks Ferry and Spence's Bridge, just giving you the broader picture down on the south, making sure that their community is safe. And then as well, looking at future, what that looks like as this fire may move towards the west. We do have on this side We do have some guard being constructed kind of along this side here. And so it's, again, really tricky to work in there and to hold with how dense fuel is and how much standing fuel and down fuel there is. But we're really trying to limit, obviously, growth in any direction. But, you know, here, keeping it on this side of the river and this area here, obviously of particular concern. So we have sort of our keeping it where it's at now. And then how we work is we take a look bigger. Whereas the next spot we can hold it at, hopefully, that's the lines that are currently being put into place. Once those are in place, we will look at the next spot where we can potentially hold it if it challenges guards in certain locations. So there's several steps of contingency lines. So we're expecting to utilize guard. Where we are at in this fire now is utilizing proactive ignitions, planned ignitions, hand ignitions. There's nothing large scale that is being planned right now, but just for awareness, that is the tactic that we use, where we will do small scale hand ignitions in some areas along here, which again ties into highway closure. If we can control that fire coming down to our guards, it's a lot better than that fire coming down uncontrolled. So that's where we're going to start getting into in some of these places is we have guard established now. The fire has been active and it has been moving, but it is somewhat stabilized in a few places where we have been able to get into guard. And the next phase now is as much as we can of this fire, and that's the perimeter, but also internal to where we need to protect values, getting rid of the unburnt fuel between the guard edge and where the active fire is. So that's what we're working on. We have 2 ignition specialists that actively make plans and identify where that work can happen. So we're getting in some highly trained, specialized resources now into this next phase of the fire. That does not mean that this fire is going to stay what that looks like. Again, it's very, very possible and likely that it will increase in size and it will grow in some areas. And so we're still at heightened concern in terms of having orders and alerts into some places. Won't be surprised if there are additional alerts and orders put into place on this fire. Today, this evening, we've usually started to have really increased fire behavior at around 5 p.m. So we're just getting into that now, where that activity might increase, again, driven by winds and the ground is fully heated from the sun during the day. So we're stabilizing in some areas, but it's definitely just the very beginning part of that on some parts of this fire. There's a lot of this fire that isn't stable and is still in and out of control completely. We don't where we're actively working on putting those in. And that's what ties into remaining orders and alerts. What those look like, how long it takes is really contingent on to how fast we can get guards in, secure those guards. That's our part. And then there's a part to do with the other local authorities that need to ensure that the roads are safe. We do some of that work. Some of the work is done by our partners. There's lots of other considerations that need to be put into place. So it's a lot of work that still needs to happen. But we have 24-hour operations happening on it. So full day shift, full night shift. That's both for our crews and for structure protection. We also have a helicopter that's able to fly at night, which is something new for the BC Wildfire Service. We've trialed it a little bit, but we're fully utilizing that. So we get some sort of supervision at night for our crews in that helicopter, and they also take a perimeter at night when possible. So on this fire, it's just assigned to this fire while we can keep it. We should get pretty accurate and up-to-date perimeter tracks. So for everyone's awareness, the app or the dashboard, these perimeters are what we work off of for our own planning. As soon as we get a new track, within 15 minutes, it's up on our public site, as well as our updates pretty much in real time as we get those updates from the field. Where myself and on this incident, it's Sarah and her information team. We're typing those updates up in real time, getting them up onto the website. So as fast as we can, we're trying to share information. So I know that was a lot. I'm happy to stay for specific questions. I'll maybe just give Greg a couple minutes to talk about anything else he wants to add, just in bigger picture from the fire center perspective, and then maybe we can open it up for, or I don't know, Colton, maybe there's other presenters after us. Sure. I'll let Greg speak, and then up to you, Colton, if we want to open for questions for all, or if whatever we want to do, but flexible to stay here however long I'm needed.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I'm just I'm not going to go too much more into what Brad and Forrest have already talked about. Just a little bit about the fire, where we're at in terms of resourcing. We have something right now. There's over 350 active wildfires in British Columbia. Over 100 of those are out of control. We do something that's called RSWAP. I won't go into the acronym, but it's basically how we priority set fires throughout the province. Thankfully, when we go through that process, the Shetland Creek fire ended up as the #1 priority in the province of British Columbia at this time. Now that constantly gets reevaluated, obviously, as more fires. There's a lot going on in the province right now, but this fire so far has been very well resourced. The incident commander, Jeff Walsh, his resource requests have been going filled. We have over 200 personnel working on this fire right now, 5 22-person unit crews, over 20 pieces of heavy equipment, 14 helicopters, over 45 structure protection folks. Their specific job is to help protect the communities with the local fire department resources and First Nations. So a pretty large effort is going into working on this fire. And I think where the perimeter is currently, we have had obviously some luck with certainly fires burning down slope and things, but a lot of that has gone because of a massive effort from the crews out there on the fire. So I think I'll pass it over to whoever, and we can answer any questions on that.
Hey, thank you very much. Move on. Okay, so those on Zoom who didn't hear that, we're going to do questions for the wildfire service now. So I can either pass the microphone around when people put their hands up. I'll keep my eye. I'll try and be standing up and looking on the screen too. So you can write questions into the chat. You should have a raise hand function as well. And so we can call on you as well to ask a question out loud if you'd like. I can't remember with the meeting setting as opposed to webinar if there is the raise hand, but maybe just best if you had a question you wanted to say out loud, just write that in the chat first, or I might be able to, I could always call on you as well and as we go along, but start in the room here. So I see a couple hands. I don't know if you guys just wanted to pass it around amongst yourselves, but there you go, sir.
Thank you. Where are the water bombers?
Just be the handing around.
Specifically to this fire? The team has full access to our air tanker program, and provincially we've actually brought in out of province air tankers, water bombers, like from Ontario and Quebec. The tricky part in steep mountainous terrain is a couple of factors. One is, as you probably noticed this morning, is the visibility. So flying, at 130 knots with 60,000 pounds, you got to make sure you can see where you're going and whatnot. And then the other piece is just how tight that topography is. So what I'm trying to say is in some areas, it's not the right tool for the job, which is why we have a bunch of the helicopters there. So that's the reason you don't see air tankers perhaps overhead right now, but they're fully accessible. And being that you guys are the #1 priority in the province, is they were working somewhere else, they would be reprioritized to this fire. So it's about the right tool for the job.
Thank you, Brad. And it's probably easier if I just call on hands up and I can repeat the question in the mic for folks on Zoom. So sir, you can go ahead. Sure. Okay. Thank you for the question. So it was There's a rumor of the fire having jumped the highway and the Thompson River. So here you go first.
So no, it didn't jump the river, but do you want to go to the map? And I know where it is, and I will show you because it is a good example of what I'm talking about with spotting. Yeah, if you know where that is to zoom in. So we can use this. We can use it as an example. So what did happen? Yes, is when we did see some activity, kind of from down here. Yeah, on this side of the fire, because when this growth was happening, part of the fire that was down here, a piece of bark probably, was blown up, floated, and landed on the eastern side of the rail track, but on the western side of the river. And there's actually, we have a videographer that is working with us, and he's out flying again today, but it's one of the things, those videos we build, it's one of the shots we actually want to put into it, because he actually filmed that spot happen. You can see activity happening here, and then all of a sudden, there's just a donut of fire, and it's just a perfect circle. So bark landed, and it just burns in a circle. So it is a quite interesting thing that happened, because it was a very good example of that. But yeah, hasn't crossed the river. And as soon as that happened, it was spotted by our helicopter coordinator, and we had buckets on it to put it out. So close. And if it had been, a little bit different wind, potentially it could be. But at this point, we haven't had any. That was probably the closest we've had to challenges of crossing the river. And that's why, again, to reiterate the point I was making earlier, is that out of control wildfire, parts of it really erratic in what they're throwing up and off and with winds. We're trying in safe conditions when we can to remove that fuel so that when it does get windy, we don't have things that get thrown across the river. And then now we're dealing with a whole new thing on that side. So that's really what we're trying to do, is clean up that entire line along the highway so that can't happen. Yeah.
Did we have any other questions for the BC Wildfire Service? Question from the back, was there any update on structures? Would that be a TNRD question? Did we want to jump into that, Kevin?
Yeah, well, yeah, so maybe we'll address that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, and Mark, nothing's changed since yesterday.
Okay. So I don't see any, thanks everyone. Oh, Mark, go ahead. Is there any access for the BC Wildfire Service on the south or north entrance? To Venables? To Venables.
Yeah, like we have crews fully engaged in, sorry, we have crews fully engaged in there. It's, access to us in terms of wildfire crews being able to work in those kind of conditions. I know, Kevin, I think you were, we can get other people in there. For everyone else, tricky for us to track, right? So I'll just leave it at that. And yes, there is, the ability to access, and we can get certain partners like the TNRD in to do the work they need to do. Obviously, we engage with other, maybe not specifically in where you're asking, but we'll get hydro in, we'll get other road contractors. Like usually in these situations, we can make it safe, in quotes. It's not safe, but it is for the trained people. So yes, in this case, that's kind of the thing we're working off of, is we can get in and out of there, but need to mitigate those risks that do exist for everyone else before we can call it good access. Too late for mop up in the valley? Yes, I would say a bit too early to call it mop up right now. Yesterday, and me being here, I'm not going to make it back to my ops meeting, but the info person will be there and they can update the, all that to say, I don't know what will happen tonight because I will be here. Last night, we still had some pretty active conditions. So I wouldn't say we're in mop up there yet in the whole area, but that's where, again, one of our primary focuses is. And the out of control growth, obviously not ideal, but it still does the same job of removing unburnt fuels. And then combination with our crews doing that, structure protection, mitigating that, I don't want to give a timeline of when we're getting there, but that is where we have most of our crews, honestly, is actioning within there to get it to stable. Once fire has passed through an area, like I said, it's not gonna, we have a perimeter. And so now where fire didn't burn, obviously in that perimeter, I guess maybe it's not obvious, but in that perimeter, everything is not burnt. Lots of unburnt fuels, it's patchy, it burns in some areas. The perimeter just shows, the edge of the fire where there is active fire in certain areas. It's not all burnt within. So in those areas where there's people that want to get into there, yourselves and anyone else who wants to access that area, we have to make really sure that there can be fire that is burning in other locations. And we can, sometimes on some fires, not saying that's going to happen with this one, we can coordinate, people being in an area where there is still action happening on others, but we have to be really sure that fire can't come back into that area. Crews are working on that now. I wouldn't say it's mop up, but it's our primary focus to get it to that stage and secure where the fire has already passed through as much as we can.
Thanks for that, Forrest, and good question. And yeah, that's a good reminder too, how when we look at this map, you see the outline of the fire, and that's the outline of the perimeter. And it obviously doesn't mean that everything is burned within that, and it will obviously vary dramatically from one area to the next within that perimeter. But I think we'll move on to ESS and see if there's any questions for ESS, unless there's any other comments for the wildfire service, and feel free to bring them up at any time. I see I see the chat pop up here, so let me just check. So a question is, what is the chance of the fire coming up Venables Valley from the south end? Did you want to take that, Forrest?
We have crews working there. I really hesitate to give chances or to predict the future. I don't like doing it. It's really hard with wildfire to do that. So I think honestly, what I can say candidly is that's our focus area. As I said, we are trying to not let that happen. But I really hesitate to give chances until we're really confident, because I don't want to lie to anyone. And I will be candid that like I said, it was very active, still in that area yesterday, and probably will be again today. I think going forward, we're less, potentially less intense fire behavior as we get into maybe some cooler temperatures and less erratic winds as the weather system changes. But again, it's just one variable out of many that might help us out. We still have a lot of variables that aren't helping us out. So leave it at where we're trying our hardest to keep it where it is at and limit growth on all fronts. But on that, Venables in that area, that's one of definitely our priority focuses right now.
Thank you for that, Forrest. I'm just seeing the chat keep popping up here. How do we get permission to enter the valley? Good question. So we'll go over that in a few minutes once the TNRD gets going, and an update on any new structure damage, were any new homes and structures damaged. And sorry, there was a comment by Kevin for now to say that we'll talk about that a bit more, but that nothing has changed since yesterday when Kevin and Mark were in the valley. But I'll go to the ESS and see if you have any comments and any questions for you. So there you are.
Thank you for having me here. I'll just give you a quick sort of overview of ESS. So ESS is a provincially mandated program, and each jurisdiction in the province does ESS in their own way. In my case, our team is supported by the city of Kamloops very, very well. And we are helping the TNRD with this incident. So we're helping you folks. And what we do is we provide for need for very limited sort of menu of things. So basic shelter, clothing, incidental, as required. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we do. So if you have any questions, that's quick. I could go into great detail, but that would be boring. Yes? Oh. So they're asking, how do we determine the number of days that things are issued? So actually, I do not. So what I would like maybe is Kevin can answer that. I mean, I can answer it, but maybe you could answer it more precise than I.
So, and apologies because we were hoping to have someone from emergency management and climate readiness, which is the provincial ministry that actually like oversees ESS. So we basically we make a request to them. It's their decision as to typically with ESS, you know, if we're talking about something like so for instance, today there was a house fire, deceased of Kamloops here, and 2 homes burned down. So in a situation like that, typically folks will be given 3 days of assistance. In a situation like this, where it's much more protracted, we have to kind of do that initial 3 days, and then we have to keep going back to the province to kind of ask for the next kind of re-up of that support. I think, I'll be frank, I think there was potentially some cross wires. We had put a request in over the weekend for it to be for the full 7 days and to push that out. That did get remedied pretty quick, but I know there were some delays and some frustrations this morning. I believe that's been ironed out. That's, and basically in terms of the duration, it's going to be as long as folks are displaced. So as long as you're on evacuation order, that support's going to continue. So folks don't need to be concerned that this is going to run out at some point. In 2021, you know, with the atmospheric river and with the fires in Lytton as well, I mean, folks were on ESS for more than a year. So yeah, that will continue. And it'll be folks like Rolene and the rest of the volunteers who will be actually delivering the service. But yeah, it's the provincial ministry that kind of makes the decision.
So how that affects you is that we can provide services for repeatedly, but we have to do it on a fairly regular basis. And it's going to vary depending how we provide you services. So if you're getting e-transfer, so some of you getting e-transfer, you know what that is? That's good. And that is the easiest way of getting it. We have to do it. Right now, we can't do it any more than 7 days out. So if we were given approval for a 14-day task and you were getting referrals, we could actually give you all those paper referrals for those 14 days. But the province has said that e-transfers can only be a maximum of 7 days. So if you're talking to your neighbor and you see there's a difference, that's why there's a difference. Does that make sense? Okay. And anything else would you like to know? I cannot talk to the Cache Creek site. Again, Kevin?
So yeah, the Cache Creek Center is still operating. And it's my understanding that there is about a dozen folks in the community who opted to stay in Cache Creek just for various logistical reasons. So generally, whether there's ESS folks there kind of full-time all day, I'm not sure, but they generally, if they're not, they'll have contact information on the door, and then they plan out, because they know when folks need to come in to renew, they'll plan to have the reception center open that day. Now, having said that, if folks need assistance or if they have questions and they're not able to get a hold of the reception centers, certainly that's when they can reach out to TNRD, to our emergency operations center. I realize these things all kind of sound the same. And you can do that directly or through Mark, and we'll leave our contact information, because we operate 24/7. Because we're looking at kind of the broader emergency, not just the ESS piece, but we're obviously in close contact with Cache Creek and Kamloops, and we are now also, there was additional orders put in today, so we also were sending folks to Merritt as well, from down towards the Spence's Bridge end.
Kevin? Any other questions that I can help you with? Oh, okay. So after the 7 days, what we're going to do is, once we have most people registered into our task number, it's a technical thing. What we will do is we can run a report. And if we're given permission to issue after the 7 days, we will actually contact the people who have e-transfer and talk to them about their situation, see if they still need support. And we will do it without them coming to the reception center. So that will be lovely for them. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So a piece of that will certainly be kind of from the wildfire service in terms of, you know, oh, sorry. So yeah, sorry. The question was just a timeline for looking at when the community can return. So obviously the first piece is going to be around the fire activity and the safety. There are parts of the valley right now that are relatively safe because what can burn has burned in terms of the fuels. But it's to the point that Forrest made earlier, the egress, you know, getting in, getting out, the broader community where, you know, Mark and I were in there yesterday, and on our way out, you know, both the north and south road, there was active fire right on the road, you know. So it'll be, that's one aspect will be, you know, when the fire activity is such that, you know, there's not that threat. Now, one silver lining of this community is that you were already incredibly self-sufficient to begin with, and you know, fairly off the grid. So there's often a big piece of this around infrastructure where, you know, once the fire is out, we now have to look at, you know, BC Hydro and things like that getting restored. So the nature of this community is that that process I expect is going to be, you know, a lot quicker than in others. And then obviously just the safety of the road and the access routes as well. So, and that's something that we work with. They are in charge of all the roads. We don't have any involvement with that directly, but we would be working with them, not only the roads themselves, but if there are trees that have been significantly burned or damaged at the roadside, we want to make sure that they've been assessed and potentially removed before we put folks back in. As you can imagine, when we see winds like this, you know, with fire damaged trees, they can fall over and obviously cause issues there. So it's a reasonable question without a straightforward answer right now. It will be dependent on the fire activity. I don't know, Forrest, if I know you're loath, yeah, because again, it is going to depend. But that, so those, I can't give you a time, but that's what the process would look like. Yeah. I mean, as fast as we can, and like I said, because we don't have. So I'll give you an example. Last year, we also look after the area over like at the south end of Adams Lake. So obviously the fires that went through the Shuswap. So we had an area in there where, from a fire perspective, there really wasn't much threat left, but it took us over a week because Hydro had to completely rebuild their entire power infrastructure, which necessitated the road being closed. So that was more of the delay than there being an active fire threat, right? Yeah. So once it's safe from a fire perspective, and I would say days. Yeah, we are going to be very motivated to get you back as soon as we can. And something, and maybe I won't go too far down this road, but also we'll maybe wait for our section, but talking about getting folks in to go retrieve medications, things like that as well, is something that we want to start looking at, obviously based on whether it's safe or not to do so. Yeah.
Any more questions for ESS on the chat or in the room? And if not, we can move on to last part from the TNRD here. Oh, did CDART have anything to? Okay. We're hearing the questions, but not, or the answers, but not always the questions. Yeah, apologies there. The questions really, that was about how long it would take to get back in once the fires moved by. You probably heard the answer of likely days once the fire risk is gone and the end of Kevin's there. So really it was similar questions, but here you go.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry that we all have to be here, but I am thankful that the TNRD and the city of Kamloops has invited CDART up here to help people with their animals. I just want to be really quick. Essentially, we do for animals what ESS and all the groups do for people. So if you know anybody who's got an animal that needs some shelter, needs some vet care, needs some food, if there's animals that have been left behind in the evacuated area that need to be tried to be evacuated out or fed or watered, if we can get permission, we'll go in. So we just want everybody to know that we are opening a shelter up at Parkcrest Elementary School, 2170 Parkcrest, for companion animals, pets. So if people need to have their pets taken care of either 24/7 or, you know, just during the day or one night or for a few hours, you can come see us, and we're going to be open 8 till 8 at the school, and we have an information sheet, and you can ask any questions you want now or later, depending what the rules are. 2170 Parkcrest Avenue in Kamloops. Yeah. If you Google Parkcrest Elementary, it might come up to one on Holt. Do not go to that school. We are not there. Parkcrest School on Parkcrest. If you drive up Parkcrest off of Highway 5, it's on your right and you'll see it.
And I missed your name. I'm sorry.
Cheryl Rogers,
Cheryl.
Canadian Disaster Animal Response Team.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so Kevin.
And maybe just before we move on from the CDART piece, Cheryl, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know also you do also not just animals there permanently, but the potential for kind of babysitting as well, things like that. So if you are in a situation where you've got your animals, but you need a bit of a break or you need to go do some errands or things, that's also something CDART. Yes, yeah. And we will, I know Cheryl provided the address, but we'll get all this information out to you as well, and it'll be on our website too. So yeah, obviously, you know, the circumstances that bring us here are unfortunate to say the least. But I really can't say enough about this community and how cohesive and how patient you've been as you've navigated this. This happened incredibly quickly. Both myself and there on Wednesday night, and it was evident how quickly this happened. The fact that this community was able to evacuate as quickly and as orderly and as safely as you did is a testament to how well prepared you've been and how tight knit you are. And I can't say enough. I know it hasn't been a straightforward journey since then. I know there have been some frustrations and there's been some issues, and for that I certainly apologize. But it has truly been, unfortunately, in TNRD, we are one of the more disaster-prone parts of this province. We deal with this kind of thing pretty much year after year. And it has truly been a really incredible experience to work with you folks. I also have to recognize Mark. Mark has been so incredibly important for helping us help this community, whether it's been advocating for you folks or bring forward the issues that we need to deal with. And indeed, even yesterday, in terms of going in for the damage assessment. Yeah, I can't say enough. That's not something that we often have in situations like this. So the amount of work he's been doing on your behalf has been huge. And I really, yeah, thank you. So the one piece that was what Mark and I were out there doing yesterday was around the damage assessment. So a few things I'll say first. Visibility was fairly was fairly bad yesterday. There were, some access issues. We weren't able to get into all the areas we wanted to, but we feel like we do have a fairly good handle on what was damaged. Now, as you kind of caught from that conversation earlier, though, obviously the fire is still very active. So, we feel like we got a fairly good picture of how things were yesterday, but it's not to say that there couldn't be more damage in the days ahead. So we, in going through the community, we counted up, well over 20 structures that had burned, but that did include, outbuildings, garages, shops, wood shelters, things like that. So we're fairly confident right now that the number of homes that burned was 6. And I know Mark has already been in touch with those folks. There were certainly, some cabins and things like that as well, but six homes that were destroyed. As I said, that number could change, but that is where we're sitting right now. In terms of there were questions around reentry. So as we said, it's going to depend on the fire situation from safety perspective, and then when we can get you folks in there. Another piece that we're very keen on, and this is something that we're working with day to day with wildfire, is around the potential for folks to get in, look for animals on your property, look for medications, things like that. That's a big function of what Colton and Joe and the rest of us in the EOC do. So we do that day by day. We have a process with the wildfire service in terms of, when it's safe, we will make that happen. When, obviously, is going to depend on the conditions. Certainly, what I saw yesterday, that would not have been an appropriate day for folks to have been in there. I have to suspect tomorrow is going to be similar given the weather we're seeing right now and the weather we're seeing tomorrow. But as soon as that is an option, we will make that happen. That might mean TNRD staff escorting people in. We typically do that in a defined time window. As Forrest has alluded to, these fires typically become a lot more active in the afternoon. So we would probably look at, bringing folks in, say, from 10 to noon. And we would have an accountability system to make sure that folks who go in are coming out and that everyone's staying safe. So when that is possible, and that's a conversation we're going to have tonight and every night going forward with wildfire, is when we can get folks in, even if it is temporarily, so you can see your properties and get what you might need to get. I think that's all I have from the TNRD. A lot of the other agencies have already kind of touched on the other points. So I'm happy to take questions now. And certainly if there's any other questions that have come up for our partner agencies, please feel free.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'll go to hands, and I might just, if that's okay, start with a few that have come in here. So I'm just going to make sure I'm all caught up. Sorry for everyone in the room on that. I just want to make sure people don't feel like when they put their question a while ago that it was getting missed. So why didn't the evacuation order come sooner? And have any more homes been burned in the last 24 hours? Who will communicate when we can access? Is that?
So in terms of why didn't the evacuation order come sooner? The speed and the intensity that this fire came with on Wednesday was not something that was foreseen. Obviously, Brad had spoken about kind of the actions taken up until that point. We were, ourselves and Cooks Ferry and the BC Wildfire Service, we were looking at the fire many times daily. We were having discussions around what was going to be necessary. On Tuesday, which seems a lot longer ago than that, but Tuesday I came up and met with Mark and we took a drive through the community and kind of talked about what some of the needs would have been. And then obviously we had that Fire Smart session that we got 20 minutes into before it was pretty obvious that we needed to get folks out of there. So obviously in an ideal world, we would have had an evacuation alert at the very least in place, and then brought that to an order when it was necessary. What I saw up there on Wednesday night was some of the most aggressive fire behavior I've seen in a 14 or 15 year career. The speed that it came, was not something that anyone was anticipating. So yes, I would have, doing an evacuation in the middle of the night or even in dark at all is what we spend a lot of time and effort, all these agencies up here, trying to avoid. And sometimes it does happen. And that is what happened Wednesday. Colton, I think the second question was around. Yeah, so not to our knowledge, since Mark and I were out there, has anything more burned? Again, active firefighting, visibility, things like that. But no, we don't believe anything further is burned. And then I think the last question was around access. So that would be through the Emergency Operations Center with the TNRD. So I think what would happen is if we sit down with wildfire and we agree that there is going to be a safe window, I would likely reach out to Mark and try to get that word out to the community. And we would look then at kind of a window for getting folks in. I know that certainly we want to try to keep the numbers relatively manageable. So we could look at opportunities where maybe we have some folks go in at 9 a.m. They come out, we have some more folks go in a couple hours later, just so we're not putting too many people in there at one time. But yeah, that's something we're definitely going to work at. And yeah, that would be through the regional district.
Thanks for that, Kevin. So communicate through the EOC for access, and our phone number and email address are on the screen there. There was another question that came in, Kevin. I don't know if you wanted to just quickly before I go to hands, just because it was related to what you just said, was why wasn't the alert put in a couple days sooner? I don't know if you had anything specific you wanted to. I think you kind of touched on the fire activity, but if you had any more to add.
Yeah, no, I certainly, if I could do it over again, I would have put that alert in place. And I think the community was pretty well aware of what was going on. It was quite visible. But yes, yeah, no, it quite frankly, it should have been on earlier, but that was the nature of what happened and just the speed that it happened with.
Thank you for that. And I guess that doesn't change really the circumstances that led to the order. But I've seen a few hands. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, question about the alert. Mm-hmm. Right. So the question was about confusion on Monday night, 2 days before the order. Of an RCMP officer was in town and mentioned something about you should watch that fire, you should be on evacuation alert. And residents naturally thought that was we're on alert now. But Kevin, I know did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so no, I think I'm not sure who the RCMP officer spoke to, but I think there was a bit of a miscommunication that they were up there. I think they were up there for something else. I don't know what that was, nothing to do with the fire. And I think they spoke to some people and were just saying, be aware, there's a fire, you should pay attention. That was at least because Monday night, we were quite confused ourselves and I think it was actually Tricia that we initially heard that from via Mark. So yeah, no, there was some confusion there, but I think it was just a well-meaning police officer. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And that is kind of what prompted me to come into the community on Tuesday as well, to meet with Mark and kind of look at how things were. In terms of we make the decisions around evacuation alerts and orders at the regional district, but it is something that we do collaboratively with the wildfire service, kind of based on their recommendations. There wasn't a recommendation for us to do that, but what occurred there wasn't something that I don't think was in any of the forecasts or the modeling that they used. So.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'll go to the gentleman in the front and then 1, 2 in the back. Yeah, so the question is when we can return, and you're talking about the temporary access or just when the order is lifted, or both? Okay. So there's a few layers. I don't know if you wanted to say anything to this, Kevin.
Okay, yeah, no, so that's great. So let's, before you leave, let's connect. Cause yes, you can have my cell number and I'll make sure we're reaching out to you directly. We've generally been relying on Mark for kind of, for the main community, but yes, no, I'd be happy to do so. And sorry, and are you on Hat Creek Road? Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, yes, yes, yeah. No. So no, yeah, let's definitely connect. Yeah. For the rest of folks, yes, we have been heavily leaning on Mark to reach out to you folks. But we will certainly, if there is an opportunity, whether it's for temporary reentry or for like when we're looking to lift the order, we would be, yeah, be communicating online. We'll often try to put updates, you know, at the reception centers as well. So like when folks are having to come in to renew their ESS, we'll try to have some material there. But yes, we have mainly been using Mark as the conduit. But yeah, let's definitely connect because yeah, that is a gap. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah.
It's a great line to draw there. Point of contact to draw. So thank you for the question. And in the back here, you can go ahead. So the question was about, and I think we're talking about the first few days or weeks or week even of the fire, where the 17th with the wildfire website and prior to I guess the fire details that are on the website, and why wasn't it updated more timely from the 17th and earlier? So I'll pass it to the wildfire.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the question. So in regards to the fire perimeters that you'll see, they're generally, it's only 24 hours. And the reason for that is with a fire of this scale, the only way to get that perimeter is to fly it with a helicopter. So what that, and with that in the mornings, and I haven't been out there in the last few mornings, so that this may not be the case, but typically in those valleys, the smoke settles, you know, in the mornings until the inversion lifts it up. So the visibility is lousy. So what we've been using is that is a helicopter that's flying at night with night vision goggles, the pilot and a personnel sitting beside them, and that's how we're tracking the fire. So that's this isn't anything new or anything that's changed. It's just that with we don't have enough aircraft to be able to do, say, like circuits around our fires every, you know, like couple hours or something. Ideally, you know, a future state, you know, there's some super cool technology that we do not have now, but we would like to have that and show progression. But we don't have the technology for it right now because the helicopters are working, right? So that's why you'll only see it once a day for where the perimeter is on that app. And as soon as it was explained earlier too, so you know, you'll use a device to obviously start your track, and then they fly the fire, stop the track on the device, and then they go and they plug it into World Wide Web essentially. And then we upload that to some GIS specialists, geomatics specialists. They have a look at the squiggly line on the map, because sometimes it's like, oh, I missed a spot, and they turn around, you know, so they can see where there's something weird to it, and they clean that up. And then as soon as they finish that cleanup, they basically upload it. And so when it hits within 15 minutes, in fact, I think it's even a little quicker than that, but I think that's our target. As soon as that clean track is uploaded, bang, it goes onto the app and the page, and it goes on to all of our systems, like our internal systems that we have. We have a dispatch, a common operating platform that we use, and we track helicopters and stuff on. That track, as soon as you get it, we're getting it. Totally. Yeah. It's coming. I think it'll be here before I retire, but there's a lot of like satellite type technology, because it's not only is it useful for us operationally, but you know, like we would include that into informing, you know, our partners and to the communities. So it's not there yet. It's a human right now. It's somebody in a red shirt with a device that goes around or walks around a smaller fire to get that. You want to add something?
Just on this note too. So you said that the firms froze. It obviously froze for us too. So that's another tool we use so helicopter flies, that's one option. We use Modus, firms, Sentinel. They're all just different satellites that fly. We also utilize those to make perimeter tracks. One of their satellites was not working, and so we couldn't get a perimeter track off that, and actually had issues again. So that's, I mean, it's not an excuse. We try and get the perimeters up either by helicopter at least once a day, but we do use Modus as well. It just is not as reliant as a helicopter. There's lots of issues where it can show weird things, and that's also good to know if you're looking at it. Where those red dots are does not always mean that there's fire. Very simple explanation. One of the reasons is heat can be reflected under smoke, and it will take that as a hotspot. So when there's a lot of smoke, the satellite thinks fire is there because that heat is being kind of blanketed by the smoke. So just take it with a grain of salt. Where you're seeing those dots does not mean there's always fire.
Yeah, that's a really good point too on the NASA firms. I know we were looking at that a couple days ago, maybe when it looked like on NASA firms it might have been spotting across the highway, but I don't think in that point. I know we talked about the spotting over the fire. I don't think that was the case with that. It was just heat radiating on NASA firms. There was a question at the back, so I'll go 1, 2, and then 3. So go ahead. Were we the first ones to, oh, sorry. Oh. Okay, so the question is, so the question is, I think probably for the wildfire service here is, were Venables Valley residents the first ones to know that the fire was coming over the ridge? Did the wildfire service know? And if so, what would be the means of communicating? It sounds like there's maybe a sentiment of if the wildfire knew, where was the?
Yeah, so we so the day and that evening of question, we had a fire officer in a helicopter that was working the fire sign to it. What we were expecting is what we were expecting through the day is that we may have seen the fire get to the ridge. But what was described to me was that once it got to the top of the ridge and the column was still tilted over, that the fire started spotting into Venables. And it was the spot fires that started to catch and build up some steam. So what typically what you'll see is that you know, we're obviously working a fire. We see some progression. We're looking at the weather forecast, maybe some projections if we have that resource available to us. And then we forecast, okay, like how many hours, you know, we want to be way in front of this more than what we were. And we put in an evacuation alert. And as soon as in this center, as soon as we recommend any kind of evacuation alert, once we talk to the local government or First Nation about that recommendation, we automatically dispatch a structural protection specialist to the area of which we've recommended an alert for, so that we can start having one of our structural protection specialists do a size up, so that we know how much equipment that we need to order and how much personnel we need to order to try to come in and protect the structures.
Okay, thank you. Was Mhm. And was that going to be your question, just so I can repeat it? Okay. So the comment question was about the timing of the evacuation order and Voyant alert came in really after the evacuation had happened. And I know part of that was the fact that I don't know if Kevin has anything to say to this, but just my situational awareness. But I know we had staff in Venables Valley physically. So when we got word and evacuations happening tonight, my understanding, and I hope I have this right, is saying this to the room, was our staff were able to work with you guys and communicate that right away with boots on the ground, and tell you guys that this order is in place now. So then once we had everything formalized, I know once we have it published with our mapping completed, once we have the area confirmed that's being put on order, after the recommendations made, once we look at that and do that, that's when the Voyant would come out, just so you know that process. But did you have anything to add, Kevin, or is that?
So yeah, I mean, thankfully, we had Joe and Dan Funk, who were already in the community. And I had already, had the ability to get a hold of Mark as well. Again, because typically this process has a lot more kind of order and structure to it, where we've got an alert and then the alert's in place for a while and then the order. The reality is, and I don't want this to sound like an excuse, but in the last few years, this isn't an experience germane to you folks. We had a number of situations last year where we were having to put people directly on order because things just happened so quickly. I don't want to get into a whole discussion about, climate change and things like that, but I mean, we've had in the last 7 years, we've had our province's worst 4 fire seasons, and quite frankly, we're on a trajectory to probably have our 5th worst fire season as well now. The kind of fire behavior and activity we're seeing and the speed at which things are happening are quite frankly outpacing the current systems, which is why, to Brad's point, we're trying to bring in more technology and things like that to get ahead of it. I'm thankful that we had staff there and that we had the relationship with Mark and we were able to get folks out. Typically, we wouldn't have even been on the ground. That's usually something where we would bring in RCMP. It was probably 10 p.m. before RCMP got into the valley. So it was myself and Joe and Danny who were essentially making sure that everyone was out of harm's way. Again, is that how it should work? No. But I'm thankful that it happened the way it did and that no one, was injured in the process.
Thanks for the question, and thanks, Kevin, for explaining that better than me as someone directly involved all the time for a long time. But there was a question in the front here, so you can go ahead.
There used to be the possibility or the option on the app that, for example, in the 2021 fire, like Lytton, that progressed to Spence's Bridge, and we could see the from the valley, and I was following it at that time. There used to be the option of looking at the satellite and you could actually see the fire as opposed to just the red squiggly line perimeter. You used to be able to see that, and that was, I found it very helpful. And I'm just wondering the rationale, but we can't, doesn't seem to be there more this option. If you could,
And when you say the app, the map, you're talking about wildfire service map? Okay, just making sure. I wasn't sure if you meant Voint Alert at first, but the question is, like in 2021 with the Lytton fire, you could go onto a fire incident on the BC Wildfire Service data publicly and look at the imagery of the fire. And now it seems like that feature's gone. So that was a question. I'm not sure what the situation is, but I'll give it to Forrest there.
I don't remember being able to do that on the old app. Like it was showing fire dots, like when you,
like see if it's the
like,
yeah. It was different than it is now.
it could be honestly. So like when we were playing around with the dashboard, you can change the layers. Those layers, we just take those from obviously like Google Earth, like what they would have on those layers. And it could be that in that case, if a satellite passed over while those fires were burning and that gets updated, we're just utilizing, like those aren't, we don't own those maps. We're just utilizing a service like on Google Earth or Apple Maps or anything. That's the only thing I can maybe think of, is that maybe it did update and there was that base layer which showed it. I don't think that I can remember in the old app any other way of where it would show. Like we don't add real-time imagery or anything. It's just basic satellite data that we buy from Google essentially. So that's how that works. So I don't think currently there's obviously any way to see fire activity. The only way is if you're looking at some of those other satellite services that we were talking about. That is where you can see them. And I hesitate to give all information out because again, it's you need to kind of know what you're looking at. But there are websites that do have perimeters, like they pull our data, they add the perimeter, they add MODIS, so you can get it. I just really encourage, don't believe all the dots that you see is all right. And yeah, so maybe Brad, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I actually don't know the answer to it, but I'll look at Environment Canada and climate change weather sites, and you can find satellite imagery for Western Canada. And that's what I have pictured in my mind of what you were looking at that time, and you know what you think would be helpful. So it's whether we pulled from there before and we stopped, I don't know, but yeah. Yeah. Yep. And I don't know the frequency of the update for environment change on their satellite photos, but that's, yeah, because you can see when the columns are going convective. Yes.
Thank you for that question and the answer. Just a couple quick ones in the chat, and I know there's still hands in the room. Was fire service aware of the community in Venable Valleys when initially responding to these fires? I think that answer would have been yes. I know there's communication that goes on between the wildfire service and the local government or regional district in our case about as well, you know, what properties, what areas, what communities are impacted. There probably would be with other companies like TELUS or BC Hydro that might have impact too. Hopefully I have that right, but got a head nod. So I think that's good there. Thank you, Brad. And for Venables, what's the effect of this fire on our water systems we depend on? I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if that's a Mark question actually, but maybe Kevin.
Yeah, I Mark, are you, we that was something we looked at yesterday. So maybe Mark, if you wouldn't mind, just sure. And obviously very preliminary, but yeah.
I tested a few of the water systems in Venables Valley, but we still need to go up to all the intakes and make sure that they're intact and safe, and cap some of the areas that are leaking. And I guess maybe earth movement come freshet next year might be another challenge. But that's all I would have to say right at this moment.
Just, it's Brad from BC Welfare again. One of the things that I just wanted to add is we do recognize and we know the challenges for water there. So we've installed a mass water delivery system pumping off of the Thompson into large tanks, which are called C-can, like they're basically a C-can. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't want to be pulling water if we don't have to out of any of the surrounding water sources there. Obviously, if it came to defending your property, we probably would, but we've brought in like these they're mass water pumps, you know, like 4-6 inch lines. And that's and we're gonna continue to explore that because it's very clear to us about the water challenges there. So we wanna try to have a low footprint in the short term.
Thanks, Brad. And there was just a question over here, and then I'll go over there. Thanks for the question. So when allowing access back into the valley, will we look at just the fire risk, or will we look at things like landslide risk and risks that exist for individual houses, maybe danger trees and stuff like that too? Right.
It's Brad again. I can speak to some of those. So the fire risk, I think, is obvious. You know, we're going to be working closely with our partners to assist when safe to do so. Like we won't sort of say, put the fire out and say, okay, now you can come in and hook up the hydro. We're going to try and integrate, you know, the reentry, all the necessary reentry works into the firefighting effort. What I can say is wildfire work is in the Ministry of Forests. And so when we have fires that impact any kind of hillside that's steep, obviously, we do what's called a post-wildfire natural hazard assessment. That typically starts to occur later in the season, like in August. And they have geomorphologists that will conduct rapid assessments on all of the big fires that we have in this region, quite frankly, across the province, but in this region. And the geomorphologist will identify if there's any emergency works that needs to take place before the fall rains come. And then subsequent to that, there'll be additional reports if the geomorphologists identify slopes of concern. So from I can't speak to all of the variables of your question, but I can speak to those two. For those of you online, the question was, is if after a big fire, there will be no fires for another 100 years. And I wish I could say yes.
Thank you for that. There's typically a period of maybe I'm just hearsay if I read this somewhere, but 10 years or give or take, potentially. Even, yeah.
It's complex. So, you know, I think you heard earlier, when the fire burns of a scope and scale like this, it isn't a moonscape. It's very mosaic. There's patches that don't get touched, and there's patches of low intensity burn, and there's patches of high intensity burn. So, you know, it would be quite dynamic. It won't be like a Bavarian forest, you know, where they're all the same age across this entire fire. So for the moonscapes, it wipes most of the fuel out of there. So yeah, what you're going to see the grasses and the buckbrush and whatnot come in there. For the trees that are standing but die, they become, well, they can be, they're a hazard in regards, right? Because they're a die dead standing tree. But after, depending on the species of trees, they'll, you know, rot and tip over. And then you might have a problem, and depending on how many of these trees are matchsticks, you know, on the forest floor. So really depends on what we refer to as the biogeoclimatic zones. It's in wildfire, we talk about forests as fuel types, you know, and not to be insensitive, but that's how we measure our fire spread and whatnot. So yeah, it's complicated. Some areas will be quite defendable for, you know, a decade or more. And there's going to be some areas that could reburn quite quickly, like even the next year. So it complicated.
Thank you very much for that. Go ahead. Yeah. No, and fair enough. No, thanks for the comment. The comment was just saying thanks for work being done by crews and especially for ESS crews. So that's especially gracious knowing, I mean, what you guys have gone through, are going through right now out of your homes, and what you've endured. I mean, we don't become sensitized to it, even though we see it every year in different places, it seems like now. So I recognize where you're at when you say that too. So was there any other questions or comments? Mark, go ahead. Oh,
Eternally grateful. Even when you make mistakes, you're still heroes. Even when you make mistakes, you're still heroes. Yes. Having been there once, never want to be there that close to fire ever again. I thank you. On that note, I have a list of 25 people. I took this position for our valley, but I've got dozens of neighbors that could easily step into my position. I just happen to be here. I got a dozen, 2 dozen names that want to do this 100, this 185. I don't really care if I even have that person. I'll be there to help mop up and clean up. We're going to rebuild. So don't think of us as a bunch of pussies that you're going to sit and wonder if we're going to get splinters. We've been up that mountain many times putting out fires. All fires start small. And I think we have, Nash, I'm not sure.
just a long comment going on for those on Zoom, and a thank you for fire crews. Not me, give it to them. Thank you though.
And we got cookies and more water for everybody.
Thanks.
And water, I want to talk to you about water. And there's still people sleeping well. There are 3 of us.
Sorry, just finishing with there's just a comment from Mark. Thank you for fire crews, and kids gave artwork as thank you to the fire crews. So thank you for that, Mark. It feels like we're getting close to the end, and I think maybe we'll just go through the last 2 questions I see in the chat, and I'll go back to our PowerPoint with our contact info, because I encourage residents on this, if you still have questions, we're going to be available nonstop anytime our EOC is open, like we always are. So some of you might be familiar with that now, but just so you know. So second to last question, is structure protection still in the valley? I think that might be for wildfire service.
Yeah, definitely full presence there. Still last count this morning was 45 BC Wildfire Service structure protection units. And then that's not counting the additional finesse and TNRD municipal fire departments that are also assisting.
Thank you for that answer. And I saw there was a question that came up a couple of times here, and let me go back to it. For those who've lost their homes, what help can we expect, if any, from any levels of government to get to a replacement home in reasonable time? Thinking about long delays in Lytton. So I don't know if this is best for us, Kevin. I'll pass it over here.
First of all, this cookie's delicious. I wish I had taken a smaller bite before getting that question. The short answer is, like, in terms of government assistance as it exists right now, no, there's nothing in place. Having said that, what we are doing, and this is a piece I forgot to bring up in my presentation, we are bringing in a recovery manager, and that's going to be a person who's basically going to come in and assist the community, look at opportunities for where we can bring in assistance from government agencies, private sectors, other funding sources, things like that. That person's getting kind of set up right now. As soon as they're up and running, I will connect them with Mark and with everyone else. There are often, having said that, is there anything existing? No. Things change. A lot of what we saw, for instance, in Lytton and the surrounding areas weren't necessarily programs that existed prior to that. Whether or not that is going to be the case here, again, time will tell. The other piece too that we've already been thinking ahead on is in terms of further rebuilding, is how that's going to look, like from a permitting perspective, how can we make that as streamlined as possible for folks too? So yeah, not a kind of direct answer, but we are going to start working on that. And we often see examples. So a few weeks ago, folks were probably familiar, there was a flooding event in Savinaw, for instance. So there was no direct government funding that was going to assist people with the cleanup. But we were able to coordinate, we as the regional district were able to coordinate some sizable donations that came in from Highland Valley Copper, or no, sorry, from, yes, Highland Valley, and then from Enbridge as well. And we were able to use TNRD resources and contractors and know-how to get things cleaned up, but it was with money from the private sector. So unfortunately, that is sometimes the route we have to go, and that's going to be a part of the journey forward. And certainly that's something Tricia is familiar with, unfortunately, from her experience in Lytton, and certainly will be a strong advocate for, I'm sure. I'm going to have the rest of the cookie now. So no more questions. Yeah.
It was good. Thank you, Kevin. I had my whole cookie in the time you talked there. So thank you, everybody. And
Like this rec center and everything else that you guys are planning on stops for us. We really appreciate that.
hey, thank you for that, Mark. And yeah, thank you again, everybody. So we'll put this online and we'll let you all know when it's available in case anybody wanted to watch back. If you missed anything, contact us. That might be still your easiest way to get answers, is if you missed something or thought of something later. We're always available to assist you that way. So we'll stop the Zoom, but thank you, everybody.